Hi, I'm Matthew Schwartz with Information Security Media Group, and I'm speaking with Chris Morales, Head of Security Analytics for Vectra Networks. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks a lot, my pleasure.
So we're going to be talking network detection and response. Why has this suddenly emerged as a priority for so many organizations?
You know, it's an interesting thing the way companies work. There's, over my last 20 years at least, there's been this pivot between, do I focus on the network or do I focus on the endpoint for security? They're both important. It's just that technology has constantly changed where we've kind of gotten better at one, that didn't work, so then we pivoted the other way. I first started looking at network detection 20 years ago, and we did something called intrusion detection. And the idea is we're going to write all these static rules and look for hackers in real time. And we ended up writing 3,500 rules, which no one would use because it created so much noise it was unrealistic. So it got to the point where endpoint companies were doing a better job than network companies, and it was a lot more manageable. And I think now as an industry, we figured out the right way to do network detection, and it's using network metadata, and it's applying the right context, and I think machine learning has a lot to do with that as well, that it now makes sense. And the reality is network has always been the best visibility into the entire infrastructure, into the network, quite literally actually. And as we see an increase in IoT and unmanaged devices like Internet of Things, you got companies just adopting and putting online everything from cameras to printers to toys to smartwatches to whatever it is. There's just a lot of devices, and network starts to gain the light again is the right way to do it.
So the market's evolving in a lot of ways. I mean,
Yes.
you touched on IoT, for example. What other big changes have you been seeing over the last 20 years, if we haven't already touched on them?
Yeah, oh geez. It's, I think it's quite simply the number of devices on the network. And I think a lot of that is because the consumerization of IT that we all know. And I think, you know, you give Apple a lot of credit for that too. It's like, ever since the iPhone, everybody has a computer, and then it's how many computers do they have? It's become a popular thing. Bandwidth has increased exponentially. All those things are true today. So we have more devices, faster networks, and we're highly dependent on them now.
So now we're talking network detection and response. How do you differentiate that from endpoint detection and response? Is that a question you get with some frequency?
All the time, because we try to work with endpoint. I think there's a symbiosis and you need both. Endpoint detection and response focuses very deep on what happens on an endpoint, on a device. It's looking at what's running on it. Commonly people think about malware, but it could be anything malicious happening on it. So that's very focused and deep. Network focuses very broadly. So when we think about the fact that we don't know what's on the internet anymore, you know, manufacturing is putting entire manufacturing lines with robots and all this on the internet. Energy is putting entire power plants on it, and they're adding smart devices and smart home meters, and even the lights.
Yeah,
light bulbs.
Lights,
I don't know why that was
locks,
a hard word to find. Yeah,
exactly.
locks. We're
Cars.
talking about,
What could go wrong?
We're talking about Amazon now wanting to take your doorbell and ring cameras and say, why don't you let a guy in? Like, you start thinking of all the things that are network connected now. And that's where network detection response really works. It's visibility into any kind of device, regardless of what it is, and being just agnostic about it.
Now, you talked about immediate visibility, also the ability to be agnostic. Are there any other business benefits to outline about what network detection and response will give you?
So that big picture means that if you think about an attack, it doesn't happen on a host. It might start on a host, then it goes to another, then they go to something else. And by the end of the day, you might have 200 plus machines involved what an attack actually looks like. Where the endpoint is looking at just deep on that one host, the network lets you map out an entire attack as it progresses across the whole life cycle. So you start to get the actual visibility of what an attack is. It's not an infected machine, it's 200, 300. It could be massive.
So what does Vectra in particular bring to the table to enhance an organization's network detection?
So Vectra is a machine learning company. We focus very much on data science. And in that, we spent years learning like what is the right data with the right context to perform threat hunting, which is the security incident responder being able to go and start to look for the problem and trying to prioritize where to look. by all that experience we have from like what data works for machine learning and how do you curate the data properly, we realized there was a huge value in this data to everybody. That it's not just about having all the data, it's about having the right data with security context. And by that I mean, there's things we can learn about. Let's say like you see somebody try to access a server. That's kind of interesting, but what if you knew not just that they access the server, but they've also never accessed that server before. In fact, they're not an administrator and don't access any server, versus somebody else who does have access to the server. That raises a whole level of interest to it. And these are all things that we can apply machine learning to start to learn about networks, and then we enrich this data with it and share it out to everybody. So it creates a higher quality data that threat hunters can actually use to find problems.
And find them more quickly, and respond more quickly.
Yeah, it's all about time and money always. It's always about how efficient can you be. Like, did this take you 10 hours or 10 minutes? We obviously want 10 minutes.
Yes, well, and we see incidents, cases of breaches extending months, years even. So if you can get that down to minutes or seconds, obviously you're in a better business benefit place.
Yeah, and sometimes the reason they take so long isn't because the person didn't know what they're doing, it's because their process was so long that they get inundated with so many alerts and so many events that they just never got to the actual problem. So once you get efficacy down, like you get efficient at threat hunting, it's more likely that you're going to come across and be able to solve the problem in the first place.
Clarify what you're looking at, so
absolutely,
that you know if it's good or bad or not.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Chris, thanks so much for your time and insights today.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure.
Thanks. I've been speaking with Chris Morales of Vectra Networks. I'm Matthew Schwartz with Information Security Media Group. Thank you very much for joining us.